Welcome back to Daily Bible with Chris. Glad that you are joining me today. Hope you're doing well. This is our part two, kind of our continuation, our commentary on today's daily Bible reading, where we began a new book. We began the book of Proverbs, and we read the first 5 chapters in the book of Proverbs. And as I say always with these Bible study or these commentary type follow-ups, if you've not already watched the previous video, I'd encourage you to go make sure you do that first. Or open up your Bible, just read through the first 5 chapters and then come back here. Or you can read a chapter at a time as we go through this if you'd like to do that. What I attempt to do here is not an exhaustive deep dive verse by verse. It's just kind of going through, pulling out general themes and understanding from these chapters. There's no way I can do justice to 5 chapters of the book of Proverbs at a time. As exhaustive as it would be, I would be here for hours and probably days trying to do that. So there's no way I can do that in this format, but just to try to give us a little better understanding context of what we're reading and what we're getting in the book of Proverbs. There'll be some repetitive themes in the book of Proverbs, just as there was in the book of Psalms, but we can pull out some general principles. So again, welcome to the channel. If you're not already subscribed, would you consider hitting that subscribe button? It's right there on the front page, and maybe give the video a big thumbs up, a like, and drop a comment if you'd like to do that. And I'd love to read that and hear that from you, and hit that notification bell so you know every time we post content. We try to post at least twice a day. Sometimes it's once a day, sometimes it's 3 times a day. It just depends on how the schedule's working. But let's dive right into the book of Proverbs. Of course, the book of Proverbs is attributed to Solomon. However, he is not the author of necessarily every word or letter or what theme in this, but he is the compiler. And he is the author of many of these Proverbs, but he's also the compiler. Many of these Proverbs come from not just within, a godly necessarily understanding. Some of these principles of Proverbs come outside, even from the secular world, because guess what? There can be secular wisdom too, right? But it's all rooted in what God has created in the world. And so there can be general ideas and proverbs and things, because what is a proverb? A proverb is kind of a general, truthful statement, right? It's not necessarily always a firm, if you do A, you get B necessarily, even though there's some of that in here. It's not necessarily a promised conclusion to it, but it's the idea that general principles, if you follow these general principles or do these general attributes, you're going to be better off. You're going to be more wise. And so there are things brought in from Egyptian traditions and other, traditions that Solomon compiled. We're told that Solomon himself authored over 3,000 proverbs and over 1,000 songs or psalms. Okay, and we don't. Obviously, we're only getting a snippet here of what he actually wrote. And of course, in the book of Psalms, we only get a few that we know specifically that Solomon wrote. So the vast majority of what he wrote, we don't have or we don't see. But he was an artist. He was a brilliant person. And of course, the first thing when God made him king, when God gave him an opportunity to ask for anything, God gave Solomon a blank check. Whatever you want, I'll do it. And he didn't ask for power and riches or any of that thing. He asked for wisdom. And so God gave him wisdom. But because he asked for that, God gave him the other things too. He would get power and success and financial riches and glory and honor and all these things. Sadly, he would squander a lot of that, but God would give it. And so Solomon is considered to be the wisest man in the Bible, although I would curb that a little bit because Jesus is also in the Bible, the Son of God. He is certainly more wise than Solomon, right? He's the personification of wisdom. In fact, I think you see some personification of Christ in the book of Proverbs if you want to look for it. And so because Jesus is referred to as the one greater than Solomon who would come. And so I think Jesus definitely is, but as far as human beings, 100% human, sinful beings, Solomon is at the top of the list. And so we see here this Solomon, and sadly too, I will say this too, Solomon sadly will not follow many of the Proverbs he lists here. He writes them down, but sadly, he won't follow them himself, and he ends up making a mess of his life. He ends up having over 700 wives, 300 concubines, basically mistresses, glorified mistresses and such, and he just chases after pleasure after pleasure after pleasure, and at the end of life, he finds that it's all meaningless. The pleasure of life is all meaningless, and truthfully, we don't know the spiritual situation of Solomon at the end of his life. Certainly he started well, but he did not finish well. We hope and trust that one day we will see Solomon one day in heaven, but we don't know for sure with him. But we can still learn from him. Sadly, oftentimes those who lay out the knowledge of things sometimes don't always apply them in their own lives. We've seen that from pastors who are great teachers of the Bible, but yet open themselves up to fall because they didn't follow the very teachings they were teaching, right? And we see that throughout the scriptures as well. But that's a different conversation for a different time. But we dive into the book of Proverbs, and also we're going to be introduced to some characters here. First of all, especially the beginning part of Proverbs, the first 9 chapters is more directed. There's more of a flow. Once you get past it, once you get Proverbs 10 on, it tends to be more of just like these little limerick type proverbs, like statements that don't necessarily always connect with whatever came before it, what came below it. So it'll just be kind of these statements of knowledge and statements of wisdom and statements of general good ideas and things that as you go forward. Whereas the first 9 chapters tends to flow in more of a narrative. You'll see what I'm talking about once we get to Proverbs chapter 10. But the narrative here is as Solomon as a father speaking to his son, which is interesting because we only know of one of all those relationships he had with all those women. We only know of one recorded son. Maybe he had others, whatever, but one recorded son, Rehoboam, who would succeed him on the throne. Sadly, him coming to the throne would lead to the civil war that would break up the nation of Israel into 2 separate kingdoms. But Solomon's writing this, and he says at first, he's the idea of the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. So again, he's writing some of these, but he's compiling this all together. He's bringing it all together into one collection. And what is the purpose of this book? Well, it's for learning wisdom and discipline, for understanding insightful sayings, so to give some understanding of things, for receiving prudent instruction in righteousness, justice, and integrity, for teaching shrewdness to the inexperienced. The idea he's teaching this to a young man who has not experienced much of life yet. That's the idea. Probably like a young adult male. That's kind of the idea of who his audience is here. And so then it's the idea of a person who will listen and do these things will become wise. And it's for understanding Proverbs and all of these things. And then very famous passage, Proverbs 1 verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, or the beginning of wisdom, as it's translated, but wisdom, knowledge, that kind of. Fools despise wisdom and knowledge. So in other words, the godly person is not foolish. Why? Because they are following after God. Fear of the Lord is the idea of understanding who we are in relation to a creator God, to a savior God who is in control of everything that we are not in control of. And so therefore, it's just proper reverence to him. It doesn't mean just cowering, afraid he's going to strike us down every moment if we do something wrong. But it's the idea we recognize our place in this world that he has placed us. Okay. And so in verse 8 of chapter 1, he continues, he begins this conversation, says, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, right? How often it is for a young man to just, Dad, I got this. I know, hey, nothing's changed in over, 2,000, 3,000 years of history, right? Even back then, you probably had a young, rebellious, young, obstinate men that did not want to listen. But he's saying, listen to your father, but it's not just the father's role. He says, and to your mother's teaching. So this is father and mother, both of them teaching. And if you listen to your father's instruction and your mother's teaching, because obviously you can learn different things from both your mother and your father, right? Especially for a young man. And there will be a garland of favor on your head, a pendant around your neck. In other words, it'll be like a crown and like jewelry on your body. And so if you have these things, you wear them proudly and everybody will see that you're a wise person. And then he says, my son, if sinners entice you, don't be persuaded. They're going to try to come after you. And if you kind of keep an idea too, some of the most vulnerable people to make bad, poor choices that can affect the rest of their life are young men. Why? Because most young men, especially late teenagers, early 20s, their brains still have not completely matured and formed. And so sometimes they'll do things out of rashness and make poor decisions that will come later with maturity. And so that's the idea here. And he says, there's those that will say, come with us, let's ambush someone, let's kill them, let's rob them, let's shed some blood, let's do these kinds of things because it'll be fun. Right? Or because it's a get rich quick, because if we do this, then we'll have all the plunder, we'll do all these things, just throw in your lot with us, Don't be a fool. Just throw in your lot with us and you'll get a share of the loot. And he says, my son, don't fall into that. Don't do that. Don't do the stupid things. How many men are sitting in prison today for the rest of their life because as a young man, they got influenced into a group and got tricked into robbing a bank or selling drugs or do whatever it might be, or being involved in a gang war and killing someone, and now they're sitting on death row, or they're sitting the rest of their life ruined because of a foolish decision they made at 18, 19, 20, 21 years of age. Maybe they get a girl pregnant out of wedlock, and now they're financially responsible for that child for the rest of their life. Okay. There's all those kinds of things that can happen. He said, don't travel that road. Don't follow them. Don't listen to them. Don't let them. Remember, it's very similar to Psalm 1, where it says, happy is the one who doesn't hang around with the sinners. Hang around. You show me who a person's hanging with, who their friends are, and I have a pretty good idea of who that person is at their heart. You're known by the company you keep, is an old saying, and it's very much true. It says, don't follow that. They're quick to shed blood. And in fact, this trap they set for someone else is going to ultimately end up coming back on them. Don't be a part of that. It said it leads to destruction, such as what happens to anybody who tries to gain dishonestly and it will take the lives of those who do it. And then we have in verse 20 this idea of Lady Wisdom. Here I mentioned we'd have some characters. We're going to have Lady Wisdom, and then we're going to have the kind of forbidden or the adulterous woman or the foolish woman. So we've got Lady Wisdom personified as a woman of virtue and beauty and intelligence. And then we're going to have this seductress, basically almost like a prostitute, or forbidden foolish woman that's going to be the contrast there. And so Lady Wisdom, she calls out in the street. She goes out. She's calling out for everyone to listen to her. Wisdom's trying to get a hold of everyone's attention. And they're calling, and she goes to the city gates and she's calling out to everyone. And then she said, how long are you you inexperienced fools? How long are you going to mock me and not listen to me? You're going to hate knowledge, right? Have you ever had somebody that they're a know-it-all? They know everything. No matter, you can see that they're making mistakes in their life and they're headed down a bad path, but no matter what you say, you cannot get them to see and realize what the path that they're on. They're just reject. That's kind of the idea here. Those who hate knowledge, those who hate correction, those who hate discipline. And he said, since I called out, and because I called out to you and you refused me, right? And it's the same idea that Jesus himself calls to us now, calls everyone to repentance, and yet we forsake, right? There's going to come a time when it may be too late to call upon the Lord, right? Well, we see this idea too. There's going to come a time when you're going to want wisdom, but you're not going to be able to find me anymore. Because you neglected me, you refused me, all of these things, I'm going to laugh at you. Like Lady Wisdom, going to laugh at you when calamity comes upon you. In other words, when you have to pay the consequences for the foolish decisions you made because you didn't listen to me, so be it. You have to reap the consequences of it. It's just like anything we do, sins and such. We may have forgiveness from God, but it doesn't necessarily always excuse us from the consequences of our sin. And so we have this idea that they're going to call for me, they're going to lead looking for me, I'm not going to answer, they're not going to be able to find me. Because why? They hated the knowledge. They didn't choose to fear the Lord. They did what was foolish, right? They lived as if there was no God. Remember, we read that earlier. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God, or in other words, no God, right? They lived as if there was no God. They lived without fear of him. And so now they're going to eat. They're going to have all this correction, and they're going to face all of these things because of their foolishness. And then chapter 2, again, it starts, my son. So again, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, listening closely to wisdom and directing your heart to understanding. So this idea, listen and store it up or treasure these things up, right? We just read this in the book of Psalms. Your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path, right? We're to, your word I will hide in my heart that I might not sin against you. We're to treasure those things. We're to hide them away. Same thing here. It's not Solomon's commands. He means the Lord's commands, right? To listen to them, direct. And so to seek after these things as if they were silver or like a hidden treasure, then you'll understand the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God. If you want to have an understanding of who God is, get in his book. That's why we do this every day, reading God's Bible, God's word, so we know more about him. We seek after knowledge. We seek after understanding. And so we see this idea that for those who fear God, the Lord gives wisdom, verse 6. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up, he gives success for those who follow him. He is a shield to them. He guards them. He protects them. And when he does all these things, you will understand righteousness, justice, and integrity, every good path. And this idea of the path, right? There is a path of wisdom. There is the right way, right? We're told that that broad is the way that leads to destruction, but narrow is the way that leads to salvation. But this idea of this path is like well worn out path, like it's you see it and follow it. Others have walked it. We need to walk it. And so this idea that discretion will watch over you, and it will rescue you from the evil. As long as you're walking the path, the Lord will rescue you. He'll keep you from perverse things, from those who abandon the right paths, those who get off the path and look to their left and their right, and they follow their own ways. They're going after paths that are crooked. Their ways are devious. It will rescue you from a forbidden woman. Now, what's a forbidden woman? Well, it would be a woman that you're not to have relations with. It could be if you're already married, you're given to that one woman. Or maybe if she is married, you're not to go into her and have any kind of physical relationship with her because she's already betrothed to someone else. So, and this idea, and especially in modern culture, it tends to be, it's always the man's fault. If there's a bad relationship, it's always the man must have. But guess what? I hate to break it to you, but ladies often sometimes can lead unsuspecting men sometimes. It can go both ways. And we have this picture here of the gullible, young man who's led astray by this woman. How? Because of her, she's a wayward woman. In other words, she's living a life as an adulteress or a prostitute. I mean, she's just living life for herself, and she's looking for her next victim with her flattering talk. She seduces. She's a seductress. She abandons the companion of her youth. In other words, she abandoned her husband. In other words, she was married when she was young, but she's now abandoned that person. Now she's living out her life, opening up her door, opening up her bed to whomever. And she not only forgot her husband, she forgot the covenant of her God. Her house sinks down to death, her ways to the land. In other words, you go into her house, you go in there and commit debauchery with her, then guess what? It's going to lead to your death and your destruction if you're not careful. And that can be interpreted a lot of ways. It could be from disease you may get from having relations with her. And this idea of just going into her is literally, it's a euphemism for sexual intercourse, right? So, but what was I saying? It leads to death. It could be from a disease. It could be from a jealous husband finds out what you're doing and shows up and executes justice on you. Whatever it might be, it could just be the anxiety of the situation can lead to an early death. It leads to death. So don't do that. None return who go to her. None reach the paths of life. In other words, those who go down that path of lust and such doesn't mean they can't be forgiven of it, but it's really hard because they're giving into their lustly passions, and that can be really difficult to overcome. So he says, follow the way of the good. Again, we got this idea, this path, the narrow path, that's the way of wisdom and righteousness, and the broad path, which is the way that leads to all perverse things and leads us off the path of wisdom. That's where the upright will inhabit. That's where the ones with integrity will inhabit. And then Proverbs chapter 3, a very famous chapter. Again, my son, don't forget my teachings, but let your heart keep my commands. Again, it's not Solomon's. I mean, it is, but it isn't. He's teaching him the things of God, the commands from God, for they will bring you many days of full life and well-being. In other words, a long life. It will please you with a long life. And those who live godly lives and do what is right and don't go after chasing after all kinds of sinful desires, they do tend to live longer. Doesn't mean a person who's righteous can't just drop dead of a heart attack, can't die of cancer, but generally speaking, if you're avoiding the things of the flesh, alcoholism and drug dependence and sexual perversion or whatever, there's a much higher chance you're going to live to have a decent life, right? And well-being. You're probably going to have better health. You're not going to have all the anxiety and such that comes from that. And so never let loyalty and faithfulness leave you. This loyalty and faithfulness is loyalty and faithfulness to God, right? And to his word. Be committed. That's why he's comparing this young man to his going after an adulteress as being unfaithful. The same way he's going to refer to the nation of Israel as being unfaithful to the covenant relationship with God. Tie them around your neck, just like a necktie, or almost like a chain around your neck that binds you to. Don't let it leave you. Don't leave it behind. Keep it with you. Make it prominent so that you know to stay in the right relation. Write them on the tablet of your heart, right? Literally carve it onto your heart, the inner being of who we are. God says he wants us to love the Lord with all our heart, right? All of our heart, not just part of it. Then you'll find favor and high regard with God and the people. And then very famous verses here. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own understanding. Other translations say, lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, know him or acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight, or he will direct your paths. This idea of trust is literally like a servant laying out prostrate before his master, waiting for an order from him. We're fully surrendered. That's trusting him with all your heart. God doesn't want part of your heart. He wants all of your heart. Partial obedience is the same as disobedience. He wants it all. And so we can't hold anything back. We give it all. And don't rely on your own understanding. Don't think you can figure this life out and figure out what you're supposed to do. Trust him, follow his guiding hand. How do you do that? You stay in constant, close relation to him and read his word. That's what we do every day. And if you do that, he's going to straighten out the path in front of you, going to make it very clear to you. And we acknowledge him in everything that we do. Do you acknowledge him in everything you do during the day, right? That job you have, God gave that to you. He blessed you with that. That family you have, do you acknowledge him in that? Whatever it might be, acknowledge him. And if we do that, don't be wise in your own eyes. That's the idea of leaning on your own understanding. Don't get so full of yourself. Solomon, sadly, is going to break this. He's going to get a little full of himself, become very arrogant and proud. Fear the Lord, turn away from evil, right? We pursue what is good. Then there'll be healing for your body, strengthening for your bones. You'll be reinvigorated. Honor the Lord with your possessions. We have this idea of the first produce of what you produce. Give generously, whether it's giving to God's house, whether it's helping those around you. Honor the Lord with your possessions. Then if you do that, there's the idea. Again, it's not health, wealth, and prosperity. If you give this, if you sow a seed, God's going to do this. But the general principle is if you're generous, then God will be generous to you. And so we have this picture of barns that are full of plenty and vats of wine are filled over. Do not despise the Lord's instruction. Do not loathe his discipline. Don't resist it. Accept his instruction. Sometimes we may look at it and say the Bible is just a bunch of rules. But to a point, yes, it is. But it's rules laid down for our best because God knows what's best for us. So we should not reject it because the Lord, and when we are wrong, God chastises. He disciplines his children, just like a father or mother chastises his children. So don't hate that because that's an evidence that God loves you. He disciplines the one he loves, just as the Father disciplines the Son in whom he delights. And if we do that, if we follow after wisdom, then happiness comes from that, true happiness. Happy is the man who finds wisdom, who acquires understanding. Why? Because she is better than silver or gold. She's better than jewels. Long life is in her right hand. The idea, as a general rule, there's a good life comes to a person who lives their life wisely, right? And she's like she is a tree of life to those who embrace her. The picture of the tree of life, even all the way back in the Garden of Eden. Those who hold on to her are happy. The Lord founded the earth by wisdom. God used wisdom itself in the creation of everything. He set everything. He established the heavens. He broke up the watery depths and allowed the clouds to bring the dew. This would be a reference to the flood. When he flooded the world in judgment, he did it in such a way that the process that we now have of rain coming down rather than the dew coming up all the time from the ground to water everything. We have now raining coming. We do have dew as well, but we have rain that falls. That's all goes back to something he set up during the time of the flood. And so don't lose sight of these things. They will be life for you. Maintain wisdom, discretion. Man, a lot of people don't have discretion today, right? In their mouth and their actions, their thoughts. We have this idea of adorning them around your neck, right? The prominent place. It's right there, this idea of the neck. The neck turns the head, right? So if that's aligned up properly with the right thing, it's going to keep our eyes focused straight ahead as we're supposed to have. Then you'll safely go on your way. You don't have to worry about stumbling. When you lie down, you'll not be afraid. There's no anxiety. You'll lie down, you'll sleep. We read that some in the book of Psalms about the sleep of the righteous person, the one who's doing it right. They go to bed with peace, right? Because they trust in the Lord. Don't fear sudden danger, the ruin of the wicked, for the Lord will be your confidence, right? We have confidence in the Lord. And then we have this idea that as we treat God rightly and properly, we should treat others, right? Love God, love your neighbor. That's the idea. So when it's in our power, verse 27, don't withhold good from one to whom it belongs. In other words, if you find that your neighbor is in need and you're in a position to be able to help that person, don't resist it. Don't hold it back. Don't say, go away, come back later. I'll help you another time. I'll do it tomorrow. In other words, let's say you've got a neighbor that's in need of financially. They're going through a difficult time, and it's in your ability to help them financially because God has blessed you. Help them financially. Maybe buy some groceries for them. Put a tank of gas in the car. Whatever it might be. Whatever. Or they need a piece of equipment to do something, or they need help fixing a car that's broken down. You see a young single mother down the road, and her car's broken. She can't get to work. Maybe help her if it's in your ability you can fix it. Show up there and go fix the car, or help take it somewhere to where it can be fixed and help her get back to work. So when it's in your position to do that, because you never know, you may be in that same situation one day and someone will need to come to your aid as well. So if you can, help those around you whenever possible. You can't always, maybe you're not in a position where you can, but when you can, do what you can, what you're able to help those around you. Don't accuse anyone without cause. In other words, don't lie. Don't be libelous against people. Don't make up stories about people. Don't envy people. And so God blesses the home of the righteous. He mocks those who mock, but he gives grace to the humble. There's that idea again. He resists the proud, but he loves the humble. The wise will inherit honor, but fools gain dishonor. And then chapter 4, again, now it's not just my son, it's sons. Listen, sons, to a father's discipline. Pay attention. I'm giving you good instruction. Don't abandon my teaching. So he keeps saying this every time, right? Repetition. And then we have this idea. He paints the picture of what it was like when he was a son to David and Bathsheba. David was his father, Bathsheba his mother. When I was a son, with my father, tender and precious to my mother, they taught me to hold on to the words of God, to keep the commands alive, to get wisdom, to get understanding, right? Most of the time my parents were telling me to get up, right? Get dressed, whatever. The same way we get something, get wisdom, get understanding. How do you do that? You have to apply yourself to do that. And the ultimate is wisdom is supreme. So get wisdom. Whatever else you do, become wise, have understanding so that you can live a life of wisdom and understanding and don't go through life as a fool making poor decisions. Cherish wisdom, embrace her, and she will honor you, almost like a wife, and cherish her. She will place a garland of favor on your head. She will give you a crown of beauty. And then again, we have listen, my son, accept my words. I'm teaching you the way of wisdom, the way, right? Jesus has said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but me. Stay on the straight path. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered. When you run, you will not stumble. Hold on to it. Don't go. Guard it, for it is your life. Don't let it go. Don't let it get, hang on to it, right? Keep off the path of the wicked. Don't get pulled off to the left and to the right. Don't proceed on the way of the evil ones. Don't travel it. Avoid it. Turn away from it. Pass it by. It's going to look good. It's going to look pleasing. But sin is pleasurable just for the moment. But a righteous life is everlasting. And so this idea gives the idea they eat the bread of wickedness. They drink the wine of violence. The path of the righteous is like a light of dawn, shining brighter and brighter till the day. Go in the path of the good one. Avoid the path of the wicked. It's just about gloom and stumble. And then verse 20, my son, again, pay attention to my words. Don't lose sight of them. Keep them within your heart. Do you get an idea here? He's saying it over. Don't forget what I'm telling you. Don't write it here. Memorize it. Put it in your heart. Hide it away. For they are life to those who find them, and health to one's whole body. As other translations say, it's health to one's navel. It's the idea of the central part of the body. It's that picture there. Guard your heart above all else, for it is the sort of source of life. Guard our heart. The eye hole is the eye. The eye is the gateway to the heart and to the mind, right? But we guard our heart. What does our heart love? What does our heart pursue? I'll give you a little bit of idea of where your priorities in life. Is your heart fully committed to God, or is it just partially committed to God when it's convenient, or just on Sunday when I go to church for an hour, right? Guard your heart. It's from your heart everything else proceeds, right? That's why when we turn our lives over to the Lord, we give over our heart, our inner being to the Lord. Don't speak dishonestly. Don't let your lips talk deviously. We need to be honest. We need to speak truth because God is truth. Jesus is truth. Let your eyes look forward. Fix your gaze straight ahead, right? If you fix your eyes on a fixed point, you'll get there, right? And the scripture tells in the New Testament that we're looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. We also see the idea of taking up our cross and following him, right? Or a person who puts his shoulder to the plow, right? How do you plow a straight line? How do you plow a straight row? Well, you find a point off in the distance, a fixed point, and you keep your eyes on it and you follow it and it'll give you a straight line. Who's the one we keep our eyes on? We keep our eyes on Jesus. When we get our eyes off Jesus, that's when our plow lines go crazy and go left and go right and they get all over the place and we end up off the path of wisdom. We keep our eyes on. When we do that, we confess, we ask for forgiveness, we repent, we get back on the path of wisdom. But it's best not to do it at all. Don't turn to the right or to the left. Follow straight ahead. Follow after Jesus. Keep your feet away from evil. And then chapter 5, my son, again, safeguard yourself. Though the lips of the forbidden woman, now again, we're back to the forbidden woman again, they drip honey. Her words sound so good, so enticing, right? She's saying the things a man wants to hear, right? Maybe things they're not hearing at home, they're hearing and whatever. Her words are smoother than oil, right? It's the idea of the prostitute who would just speak whatever was necessary to to trap a man to go home with her so then she could get paid. She could go through the act of prostitution and be paid for it. But in the end, it's like oil and honey at first, but in the end, it's like bitter, like wormwood, and it's sharp. It cuts like a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Again, there's that idea that whether it's, a jealous husband may kill you, or some disease, or some other thing that can lead you on the path to death and to the grave, an early grave, Sheol. She doesn't consider the path of life. She's not worried about it. She's just worried about the moment. She doesn't know that her ways are unstable. So now listen to me, sons. Don't turn away from the words from her mouth. Keep your way far from her. Don't go near the door of her house, right? If you don't go near the house, you can't go into her, right? So keep yourself away from it. Otherwise, you'll give up your vitality to others and your years to someone cruel. In other words, the idea of a young man going in there and giving of himself physically and giving up things, and who knows what might happen. Again, disease and such might cripple a young man where he can't have children, or he'll have sexual disease the rest of his life and destroy for someone who's just seeking after you for the act for money. And at the end, you'll lament that your body was consumed, and how I hated discipline. My heart despised correction. I didn't listen. In other words, how many men at the end of their life, or even middle age, look back and go, man, I was so stupid. I can tell you, I made plenty of dumb decisions in my early young life that I still look back on with such regret, right? But don't do that. We don't want to do that. Of course, none of us are going to live a perfect life. We're all going to have those areas where we're going to fail. But the idea, don't fail in this area, right? And then we contrast that. So don't go after the seductress, the forbidden woman, the adulteress, who's just after you for her own pleasure and for her own financial need, and it's going to lead to your destruction. But if you're in a marital relationship, enjoy your marriage. We have this picture. Verse 15, drink water from your own cistern, water flowing from your own well. So we got this picture like being refreshed. You drink water from, in other words, from your own water fountain, right? Don't go out and get refreshed. Okay, it's kind of painting a picture here, right? Don't go out and get refreshing from anybody else. Get it at home from the woman that you are married to, right? Should your springs flow in the streets, streams in the public squares. Okay, I don't have to paint too hard of a picture. What he's pointing there, right? That sexual act, right? The sexual release. That's for your wife, not for anyone else, right? They should be for you alone, and not for you to share with strangers. Once you're committed to that woman, it's for her, for the rest of your relationship with her, for the rest of your life. Her and her alone. Don't be spreading your seed around everywhere else. It's for her and for her alone. Let your fountain be blessed, and take pleasure in the wife of your youth, right? Take pleasure, enjoy it. Marriage should be enjoyed, and the sexual bed should be enjoyable. There's nothing off limits in the marriage bed. Now, prior to marriage, yes, that's off limits. And outside the marriage bed, yeah, that's off limits. But everything within it, we have this described as she's like a loving deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts satisfy you, be lost in her love forever. We get a little picture here of how Solomon's going to write when he writes the Song of Solomon, right? The idea that her beauty and her body and such are for your pleasure, as is yours for hers, right? For a man's ways are before the Lord's eyes. So don't lose yourself to a forbidden woman, or embrace a wayward woman. Embrace the wife of your youth, right? A wicked man gets trapped in all these things. He gets entangled in the ropes of his own sin. He will die because there is no discipline, be lost because of his great stupidity. How many men have messed up their families, messed up their marriages and such because they fooled around with another woman? They thought the grass was greener on the other side of the fence, but it wasn't. And they destroyed what they had because they couldn't stay at home. They couldn't keep it in their pants, trying to keep this PG, couldn't keep it in their pants, and they ruin it, they destroy it, and because of their own stupidity, because they could not control their own fleshly desires. And sometimes this can just be, having open conversation and open intimacy within the marriage, making sure that all the marital needs are being fulfilled, both sexually, emotionally, whatever it might be, physically, that they're being met, so that we don't start looking outside of things. Doesn't get the man off the hook or the woman off the hook for looking outside, regardless. We're not to do that. But we need to be taking care of each other, right? Because in a marital relationship, the husband's body is not his and the wife's body is not hers. Doesn't mean we abuse each other, but it just means we shouldn't withhold, as the Apostle Paul wrote, we shouldn't withhold ourselves from each other. We should come together, except from those times when it's necessary to be apart. But we should come together and enjoy sexual relationship in that, and enjoy your marriage. Have fun. In other words, have fun is what Solomon's saying. Then you won't be tempted to go out looking for thrills with this wayward, sinful, forbidden woman. So I hope that helps bring out some general thoughts. Some of these things are pretty self-evident. if I can use an old colonial term there, from the Declaration of Independence there, self-evident. We hold these truths. Some history popping in my head right there. That's okay. I've said enough for today. So tomorrow we'll be back in Proverbs at Proverbs chapter 6. So can't wait to be back in that for those 5 chapters, and we'll see you then.